I have been making video games for 3 years now, and I've made many games in those years. But it all started with one single game. It is called Hidden, and it is a rather simple stealth game. As you can see, it is not that good, so in this video I'm going to remake Hidden 3 years later. How much did I improve? Let's see. Before we can start building the actual game though, we first need to have a look at the design. So basically the idea. This is because I already did a few mistakes in this very early phase of development. The three main problems were the yellow boxes that you can push to turn off a laser. They were just super weird to control and did not make too much sense, to be honest. Next, there's the problem that lasers from another room are still active in other rooms. So there's basically no real separation between rooms. And last but not least, the sub-genre of the game, the roguelike, doesn't fit the game at all. So the game actually wants to be more of a puzzle game than a roguelike one, so I'm gonna aim for a more puzzle game experience in the remake. I'm also replacing the yellow boxes with energy projectiles, and I want to add doors for proper room separation. One more thing I noticed is that the original game is just way too hard, which makes it impossible to beat, so I definitely need to care about the difficulty as well in the remake. Now with those improvements of the concept, we can start building a prototype. This means trying out the idea, which wasn't too important here, but also it works like a sketch when drawing. You don't spend any time on polish, arts and all that, but you entirely focus on the game design, and that's exactly what I did. With the prototype now being finished, there's the player movement, 5 different enemy types and a basic setup for rooms. For the enemies I kept 2 of the original ones, being the static and simple rotating one. I also removed the old following enemy but added a new melee enemy and one that looks at the player. The last one is a rather rare one, being the rotator enemy but with 2 lasers. This one is just like a little mini boss or something like this. Next I moved on to making the slingshot like energy projectiles together with a really satisfying bounce effect. I just spent way too much time playing around with this, and after then I got over my little bouncing addiction. I made the projectiles disable the turrets they are able to. I needed to make sure that you can't break the game by disabling any turret you want, but now you can only disable the ones that glow. I also changed the movement of the melee turrets to the A-star pathfinding solution, so these can maneuver around walls. Now that the main design is set in stone, we can finally create art. I started with the environment art, and shortly after that I remade the player character. I think the game already looks 10 times better than the original version at this point without any polish or anything. You can see that a lot of stuff in the old version just doesn't have art, which makes the overall appearance of the game a lot worse. Another problem was the randomly chosen colors and my failed attempt at doing pixel art, of course. You can see the art being a bit blurry in spots, and this is because I didn't change the resolution of the sprites to be pixel perfect. Of course, over the years I improved a lot in doing art, and so all of the listed things are definitely not going to happen anytime again. For the remade player character, I also like the idea of a bright outline that creates some contrast between the background and the player. To let the outline actually be behind the player and not overlapping its own body, I used the all-in-one shader asset to create the illusion of it actually outlining the player, even though it is just a bright version of the same sprites behind the actual player rig. Just after that I animated the player character, created an effect for when the player holds an energy projectile and polished a few things. My goal here is to make a proper vertical slice of the game, so it is polished and shows off what the final version of the game will look like before I move on to creating content, so the levels. To achieve this I now set up the camera system using Cinemachine, and I also drew all the necessary sprites. There were also things like a level end portal, level transition, and of course the player's death. Those were another thing that I implemented around the same time. Now we're pretty much finished with the vertical slice, so I was able to begin building levels. My goal for building levels was to build at least one per day, which also made for quite unique scenarios because I took my time to properly think about each and every single situation. generation. This in comparison to the original game is absolutely different, because I just had a quite bad random level generation, which means it chooses one of 3 pre-built levels that consist of the same rooms. Now the game focuses on puzzles, unique situations and 5 levels that are built with enough time and effort. One big problem in the original version also was the tutorial, which was one giant wall of text, so I turned that into an interactable Cuphead-like tutorial. Lastly, it was time to finally polish, and of course a splash screen and a main menu. In terms of audio, I was lucky enough to find the same soundtrack as in the original version on opengameart.org. This is, to be honest, the only thing that is actually good in the original version of Hidden, and this is because I just didn't made it myself. And with that, here is the original game, Hidden versus Hidden Remade 3 years later. I hope you like it, and if you do so, it would really mean the world to me if you liked and subscribed. You can also play the remade version of Hidden with the link in the description. I hope I will see you next time. Cheers.